Hello everyone, my name is Christian. Welcome back to Tekpon. Today our guest is Abhi, the CEO and co-founder at Togai. Hello.
Hi Christian, nice to meet you.
Very nice to meet you. Please tell us, what is Togai?
Togai essentially is a billing platform that for the new generation of technology companies, right? So it helps essentially a company implement any kind of pricing that they want without the billing system becoming a bottleneck for that, right? So we started the company with the pursuit of companies that are moving towards consumption-based, the usage-based pricing, and how we handle their end-to-end pricing and billing. But the larger story is that we want to essentially help companies price their product in any way they want, and we'd be able to handle their entire workflows from pricing to billing. That's what we do at Togai.
That's awesome. What would you say are the most loved features by your customers?
Right. So we're fairly early into a journey at Togai, right? The larger vision, the starting point for us primarily was how we kind of started looking at this entire problem as a pricing first problem and not a billing problem, right? So
Okay.
Billing is a fairly solved, concept, right? And there are multiple features within billing that a lot of companies are built for, right? But the pricing aspect of it is something that is still done very manually or using Excel sheets, etc., right? So if somebody in a company wanted to kind of implement a certain kind of pricing model, right, that was not very simple subscription. What happens is you would need to track your product usage, you would need to meter it, you would need to essentially be able to associate any of these events that you track to a certain pricing plan and then generate a bill, right? So what we do and what our customers love about our product is that we essentially build each of these aspects of this as separate features, right? So we can use a product to meter, right, like associate and create as many price plans as you want at a very, very granular level, right? So that once this setup is done, you essentially are creating, automatically putting customers into the price plan and generating invoices every month without that needing to be any manual intervention or any engineering effort that goes into it, right? So at the core of it, our pricing configuration and our metering capabilities is what customers love and come to us for.
And I guess that's the free product that you use, metering, that you offer, metering.ai.
That was a feature. So yeah, we do kind of have some feature launches predominantly, right? But if you look at our website, we predominantly have two kind of plans, right? So one is for the early stage companies, they that want to incorporate any kind of pay-as-you-go models, right? The largest USP of our product is that the flexibility to incorporate any kind of pricing model, right? You're a subscription company, you want tiered pricing, you want hybrid pricing, you want a combination of these pricing, you want completely pay as you go. All of this can be implemented within Togai, right? So we have two kind of customers that we typically target, the early stage companies, so predominantly self sign up, very automated motions. And then slightly larger growth companies, right? We typically tend to differentiate this as 0 to 5 million and 5 to 50 million, 50 to 100 million, right? In terms of revenue ranges. The first one is predominantly very self-sign-up motions, but the latter is predominantly sales-led for us. And we do end up helping them implement a lot of the stuff so that their engineering effort is as minimal as possible, and our team kind of does a lot of the heavy work, heavy lifting for them, right? So that's what we do. And initial, we do have a free plan, an early initial kind of a free plan that is for very early stage companies to come. The first $10,000 or the first million events that you use with us, that's free, right? And then we upgrade them to a base plan and so on and so forth, depending on our customers' need for a product. Yeah.
Thank you for explaining. And now I'd love to hear more about the pricing vault. I know it's a resource hub, right, for founders.
Right. So here's the thing, right? So maybe I'll give you a little bit of story essentially about how we got into doing this as well, right? We're actually second time founders. We scaled a company from 0 to $5-6 million ARR in about a year and a half, right? We built India's largest payment gateway for crypto and Web3 companies, right? We are essentially on-ramp, off-ramp platform. We are not a crypto company. A lot of the customers were crypto exchanges. They're the largest ones in India. We started out pricing a product predominantly as a traditional payment gateway, like a Stripe, right? But then we ended up building a lot of APIs that were for different requirements, right? Like fraud management, whitelisting, etc. And we realized we were not monetizing a lot of these, right? So customers were using us very differently, but we were not monetizing them, right? So we ended up building an internal. So firstly, we went outside the market and try and see if there were tools that will help us do that, right? Implement sophisticated pricing plans, right? Depending on the customer, depending on what product of ours is using, could we kind of like monetize them differently, so on and so forth, right? But we couldn't find a ready-made tool that will solve for us, right? Most of the tools were billing tools, where we had to do all of the calculation or the metering and eventually send it to them where they would generate an invoice, right? But this entire gap between your product usage and your bill, this was essentially not solved. There were no tools that were kind of like doing this, right? And when a use case around pricing, such as what we wanted to face, the first company came about, we ended up building this ourselves, right? So then we kind of like productized that, and that became Togai, right? And when we started talking to customers and companies, other SaaS founders, we kind of realized that almost every customer that we spoke with agreed to the fact that they're leaving money on the table. Their product was not priced more optimally, and the pricing was very heuristics or very gut driven, right? Okay, a competitor is A, we'll charge A plus 1, A minus 1, and just it's very not data oriented, but very gut feel oriented, right?
Yeah.
But more sophisticated, evolved companies eventually started looking at pricing a lot more, a lot more deeply. But most companies, by the time they get to the stage, are already beyond. They already have a lot of debt, right? They should have done this 2 years ago, 3 years ago, right? By the time they realized that, right? So what we kind of realized was, we need to start to talk about pricing. It's not just about putting Togai out there. It's about talking about pricing and how it's a very important growth lever, right? Now, theoretically, all of us know that. You ask any founder how important, everybody will say, yes, it's the most important pricing lever, right? You change it by 1% and you have 10% upskill, etc., right? But pricing has a lot of second order effects as well, not just first order effects, right? The way you price your product decides kind of how you sell, decides how you renew, decides how many customers are churning, right? Decides how you can retain your customers, right? Depending on your packages, etc., right? Like if you have three packages, right? And if a customer wants just one feature of the highermost package, right? And if the customer is paying that a lot more money to use that, he's highly likely to churn, right? Now, the more important part is, how do you track that? Do you see what the customer is using you, and then kind of like figure pricing and package points that makes it viable for the customer to use you in the best way possible, right? A lot of the PLG motions are around this theory itself, right?
Yes.
So we kind of realize there's a lot of pricing knowledge creation that we need to do, in the sense some of this could be very commonsensical, some of this could just be talking about it often, so people come and start looking at it much more earlier in their company building journey, right? And the pricing vault is a step in that direction, right? We do tend to talk a lot about pricing. We do tend to write a bit about pricing, right? And we do talk to anybody, like any customer that we speak with. And most times they're not even trying to sell a product at Togai, right? We're just talking to them about how they're pricing and how they should be doing pricing differently, right? Because in the longer run, if they are going to look at pricing very differently, they would need a tool to kind of implement that, and that tool automatically becomes Togai, right? So essentially, this is a part of what we would call as category creation and expansion, and not just our brand building. We truly believe that pricing is a very large lever that is going to become a very intrinsic part of how companies grow over the next decade, right? This is just small steps in that direction, if I may put it that way. Yeah.
And what is the biggest mistake that you see companies make with their pricing strategy?
Oh, yeah, the number one mistake that companies make is they start too late, right? Like, in the sense, that's predominantly it, right? Because the prioritization of pricing comes much later, right? And by the time they start looking at it, they're already kind of like playing a game of catch up, right? So what happens is, you typically need to start instrumenting pretty early, right? Like, so if you're not tracking how your customers are using you very early, you don't know what to monetize, right? You don't know, is this the correct variable? Are different customers different, right? It's very unlikely that every customer of a company uses them for the same value prop, right? Like, now let's say we're using Zoom, right? Like, in a very simplistic way, like now an educational institute, like during COVID, like a lot of schools were doing Zoom, right? And they used to have like students attending classes, or like or for a digital meeting. The use case for that is very different from a one-on-one meeting, for example, right? Now, probably charging both of them on a simple licensing fee might be just not the most optimal way to do it, right? You want to charge, like, let's say, an educational institute differently, a corporate company differently, etc., right? Now, to do that, you need to understand how the product is being used, right? Which means you're tracking it consistently, iterating on different pricing points, right? and then kind of figuring out what's the value for that customer, right? Now this could be one customer, this could be a segment of customers, right? But it's very unlikely that the entire customer base is just going to be fit in within 2 or 3 plans, right? And that's what most companies end up realizing pretty late, right? And then they're playing catch up for a long period of time before they reach some kind of this thing, right? So that would be probably the largest mistake when it comes to pricing that companies do. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing. I really appreciate it. Now I'd love to hear your favorite customer success story. How you help them increase their revenue. Yeah.
Sure. So we'd actually, like I said, we're like 3 months into a launch, right? The first 10, 12 customers, right? And we had a couple of very interesting customer stories that we work with, right? Like, and a couple of them actually even went public. So the first customer that we signed up was a company called AppSmith, right? And they were an open source company that had raised a large amount of capital because the user base was pretty large, right? But they were just starting on the monetizing journey, right? And very unique customer base in the sense, a customer in the sense that they wanted to monetize based on the time their customer spends on their platform, right? Now, not many SaaS companies monetize based on time spent, right? It's typically licenses, etc., right?
Yes.
So we kind of help them implement that and automate their entire pricing to billing platform, right? So that was like a cool win for us, number one. And recently, one of the largest customer that we have on date, right, was like a 30 million plus ARR or approximately a 35 million ARR company, right? Like, so that's a company that was using a competing billing product, right? So a large billing product that they invested a good amount of 6-figure US dollars into, right? And what happened was like they realized after doing the Series C, right, that the current pricing models were pretty restrictive. Like I just said, they realized it probably a little late, right? Yeah. So they wanted to kind of, not too late, pretty late, of course, they can still go back and change that, but yeah, you know. So they wanted to kind of start implementing slightly more usage based. So they were pretty subscription based initially, but they wanted to implement some usage based components, right? So and the existing tools really couldn't help solve for that use cases, right? So they came to us and we started helping them solve for that specific metered use cases, right? But they just started figuring how easy it was for us, and we kind of got them to a place where they didn't require any person, right, to kind of like, they actually had a team that was solving for this before that, right? But then they realized they could kind of do this completely in an automated way, right? And then they managed to come back to us, and within a month after doing that, we actually replaced the entire older billing system as well, despite them spending about greater than 6-digit figures on that, right? Because they just wanted one simple system, even for the traditional subscription pricing, right? Because what they realized was we are a lot more of a proactive tool, right? A lot of the billing tools are reactive. So you have a pricing model, the billing tool will help you implement that, right? But our core thesis is that pricing models are very iterative. You typically, all right, so that means if you have some pricing model today, your billing system should be able to handle that. But if you want to change something tomorrow, you shouldn't now then be negotiate. Now my billing system cannot handle this, and what do I do, right? So Togai, what it helps you do is actually gives you in a place where you're able to implement any kind of pricing model that you want, right? And change it, and our billing systems will be able to handle that very, very easily, right? So and that we managed to kind of bring them on here. I wouldn't make claims of like revenue increase today, right? Because revenue increase respect to pricing is slightly in the longer run, right? But primarily for us, the immediate thing is cost saving, right? Cost saving and effort saving. That's most important, right? Your developer effort is not going in here. And setting in a culture of iterating with pricing that will essentially lead to growth over a period of time, right? We realized that earlier billing systems, typically people are not iterating. They were just like, now when they come into Togai, the ability for a product or a pricing manager to iterate without needing their engineer is so easy and so high that they start iterating, that they will see revenue increases over a point of time, right? So maybe we're just 3 months in, so maybe down a year down the line, we will have a lot more examples of what those revenue increases kind of like could be, etc., right? But yeah, at the moment, this is kind of like some of the wins that we've had so far. Yeah.
That's awesome. I wanted to ask you how you differentiate and why a Series C company chose you instead of other billing tools, but you already answered the question, so you did great.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, just to kind of reiterate that point, maybe the main reason is our systems are primarily built in a manner that's proactively able to handle any kind of pricing model. We look at billing as a subset of pricing. That's why a product is built that way. We don't look at billing as an individual product. Billing is a subset of how you price a product, right? So that's kind of how we've started. So if you look at a one line, if you typically ask a company in a very non-sales call, like, hey, what do you do, right? We typically say that we help our customers track every action of their customers and monetize that action, right? Which basically means that it could be a click, it could be something else. So the entire flow from what a customer does within your product to billing is something that we kind of like capture, or we'd like to kind of solve for. And the biggest reasons why they come to us is because they can do anything within that, and our billing systems will handle that, and they won't break because, hey, we do usage based, we want to do tiered pricing and we can't implement that. They won't have those issues with that, right? The newer way of SaaS companies are going to price is going to we firmly believe is not going to be traditional subscription based at all. Is going to be a lot more hybrid and a lot more sophisticated, and the billing systems that needed to handle that also needs to be more sophisticated, which is what Togai is being built for. Yeah.
So you are in a very good position. Thank you for sharing.
Perfect, yeah.
So if I understood better, you had a company before and you started Togai because you faced this problem. Did you sell the previous company, or what happened?
Right. So we actually had a company before this that was pretty highly scalable and cash profitable, right? So we had scaled, like I said, from about 0 to about $5.5 million plus, a little close to $6 million in ARR in about 16 to 17 months, less than a year and a half, right? But primarily, like I just said, so the company was essentially a payment API company that was supporting a lot of customers in the crypto and the Web3 space, right? And a lot of regulatory aspects around that in India started coming. So it was not a direct impact to us, but an indirect impact, because the customers, if they start, we will have that, right? So we kind of realized that for ability to scale from 5 to 50 might actually be impacted because of a lot of regulations and government, this thing, and we didn't want to kind of like be in that space, right? So we decided to pivot away very quickly and chose one of the large problems we were facing in that company, which we solved for at Togai, right? Now we actually didn't end up selling the company. We did have quite a few offers actually to kind of like sell, to buy for that company to be sold. But almost all of those offers, because we were a very early team, required us and the team to go be a part of the new company, right? And by the time we had already built a bit about Togai, we raised our first round with respect to Togai, and the entire team that built the first company actually continues to build Togai, right? So we didn't feel the risk reward would be like for us to go work for 2-3 years within the new organization to get acquired and then come back again. We felt was a large gap, and by then we already built a lot of momentum with respect to building Togai, right? Yes. So we decided to continue building Togai, but the entire product and the code base, etc., we have it with us, right? So at any point of time in the future, we think where we get some time to spend on it, maybe a few months where we could actually spend, we would kind of keep the option of selling that open, right? But yeah, we still like just sell the product and not the company per se, because we'd like to continue building our own company. Yeah,
I think that was a very smart decision. Congratulations.
Hopefully, I don't know, like maybe in a few years we'll be able to know if it was smart or not, but yeah, we hope so too.
Yeah, and I guess the main focus right now is Togai for the whole team.
Oh, it's a singular focus, right? That's that company. We shut down operations last year, like about a year ago. We kept it running for some time till we raised capital for this round, for this company, because that the cash helped us run a company, etc., right? But the moment we kind of signed a term sheet for this round, for Togai, we completely shut operations on that, and it's a single company. We run only Togai. That company is in the past, right? Nothing to do with it. That's part of it. Yeah.
Thank you for the transparency. And I'd love to know how many people are at your company right now.
Yeah, so we are about a 25 member team, right? So like I said, we were about a 15-16 member team initially building the first company. Almost all of them came to Togai, and then we've added about 10 more people, right? I think right now we kind of like, so the second time we kind of hired a little early, in the sense we believe in like hiring and then giving responsibilities and delegating it early, right? So we probably would have hired, instead of hiring like 2-3 people every quarter, we kind of like front loaded it a little bit this time, right? And the reason is also we're building out of India, right? Like, and our goal is to capture the entire space between product usage and and billing, right? So we will be ending up building multiple products within that space. Though we started with the metering and the pricing, we will be building multiple products, right? Very much the goal is to build a compound startup, right? I mean, some people think it's great, some people think it's not, but we believe in that. So we're going to be building multiple companies. And also when customers come to us, one of the largest things that we help them do is we help them implement. We kind of remove the engineer from the equation, and our engineers kind of take a lot of the heavy lifting. So we are very a lot of almost like about 18 of those 50, 16, 17 of those 25 people are engineers, right? Like, and that's kind of where a lot of our hiring will be done in the future as well, right? We try and keep the rest of the team as lean as possible, so that we can just kind of like hoard the best engineering talent in the country to come and work with us. Yeah.
That's a great vision. I love it. How much did you raise?
So we did a 3.2-ish round, right? So pre-seed was about $3.2 million. This we raised earlier this year. Yeah.
What would be your advice for founders looking to raise nowadays?
Actually, like my experience with fundraising has been pretty interesting in the sense that the first time, the first company we built, we were actually at about $1 million ARR. By the time when we went out to fundraise, right? And the fundraise was actually a regulatory requirement. We didn't need the money, but there was some requirement, but we needed to apply for a license, and that license required us to have a certain amount of capital, and that's why we went and raised, right?
Okay.
But because we were serving a segment that was crypto and Web3, we had a very difficult time raising, right? We literally couldn't raise at all, like till finally, like literally we were 2 months away from deciding that, that's that, and we want to shut up, and that's kind of when a fund, a very good fund from India, they kind of put their trust in us, and they we raised with them, right? It's Stellaris. They kind of invested in us, right? And the second time out was very different because by then we'd already built a company from 0 to 5-6 million ARR, so we had some credibility in the market. So when we decided that we go out to kind of fundraise, it was just like 2 weeks. We just had to kind of time bound it and say that, hey, like we want to talk to companies, and we were lucky enough that some of the best funds in the country trusted us, and we had a good few options to choose from, right? And we went with Together Fund, which is a SaaS first fund based out of India, right? Which is led by Girish, who's the CEO of Freshworks, the Nasdaq listed company, right? Yep. So that was our journey, right? And for founders, two things, right? Like, so for me, at least this is how I look at funding, right? I look at funding as a very reactive process in the sense that you first look at what business you want to build and then decide what you need, right? A lot of the times when you're starting out, first time founders, you are building or basing a lot of your assumptions based on, if I raise $2 million, I will build this. If I raise $1 million, I'll build this, etc., right? But I basically believe it's reverse, right? And I've done the same thing as well, right? The first time even I didn't know what it was, right? Like, so it's a little, it's very fancy in a certain way, right? The sense, so you see all this money, and then almost everybody has some feedback, and it's all well-meaning feedback, but then you take a little too much to that, right? So we kind of lost the way a little in the first process because we used to go into VC meetings, and then we'd hear something, we'd come back and we'd be like, hey, wait, should we be building it this way instead of that way, right? But then my co-founder, and we're very close friends, like we've been friends from Arvind, and maybe friends from school, right? So we had the relationship where then we decided that, hey, you know what, we need to kind of divest this process, right? So I will do all the fundraising process, Arvind will do the building process, so we're not kind of influenced by each other's this thing, right? So typically if you have a co-founders, completely dissociate, my advice would be dissociate the process. Not all founders don't fundraise, just one, and don't make sure, and that founder's responsibility is not to kind of communicate everything back to the team, is to communicate and filter what they feel is like the correct advice or needed, and then just kind of skip everything out, right? Because sometimes when you keep getting no's, it's demotivating, right? Yes. And when you're demotivated, you don't want to demotivate your team. You want them to continue building, right? So kind of dissociate that and be pretty reactive, right? And also kind of like have a longer term view of like how much do you think this business you're going to need to fund over a point of time, right? So let's say, my view, if I want to build a 100 million ARR company, I think I want to be building that, probably raising about $100 million, right? That'll be a good number today, right? Which means you as founders, what are the dilutions, you work backward from there, right? So, what are you comfortable diluting, because you want to be holding some part of the company when you eventually, let's say, when you have a success outcome or when you IPO, right? Or you also want to be having enough, let's say, the great exit option that comes in, you've raised the round and somebody wants to buy, right? So kind of have a larger number in mind and kind of back back work from there, you will also kind of be able to understand does the valuations make sense. If somebody is giving an insane valuation, right, you'll know, okay, I don't really think this makes sense, because how will I grow into this, etc. Right?
Yeah.
So we did that a lot, right? We backtrack and say, okay, if I do this round at this, then maybe this seems like a feasible goal to achieve, and then go on from there, right? But sometimes in the market could be crazy. Like in 2021 it was crazy. We used to get offers like which we didn't even make sense to us, right? Now it's a tough market, so those kind of numbers have calibrated a little better. But always good to know what you think your milestones are. These milestones will obviously change, but just as a rule of thumb, or like something for yourself to know, right? So that you can work backwards. That would just be good to know, right? Like, yeah, this some of the things that I had, maybe like I would say about fundraising. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing. I appreciate it. What has been your biggest challenge since starting Togai, let's say, or starting the previous company, the Web3 company?
So no, that's not a Web3 company actually. The payment, it's just a Stripe for Web3 companies, but we were just a Stripe, right? So primarily, it's been a fascinating journey, right? Like, so we started in 2018, right? Challenges have been crazy, right? 2018 we started, we didn't launch the product till 2020. We were actually trying to build the product in 2020, and we had some external dependencies because of which we couldn't launch, right? Like we were trying to work with Master and Visa's APIs, and we couldn't get the access to go production, and multiple stuff happened, right? So primarily, two of the largest learnings for me, let's say maybe 2 or 3 from the kernel, is like try and minimize dependencies, right? So startup is anyway a low probability event, right? So within that, you don't want to kind of like decrease your probability even further, right? If there are too many moving parts that are not dependent on you, right, as a first time founder, right, then you probably want to kind of go back and think about it, right? So for example, one of the major reasons we shut down an earlier company despite it kind of really scaling well to a second company was we felt that there were a lot of uncontrollables, right? Like a regulation, for example, for a company, we had no control over it, right? And we couldn't just keep waiting for things to change behind us, right? So try how much of the controllables you can, try and pull it back, but be comfortable with the fact that 90% of it is uncontrollable, or the market is going to decide everything that you do. So be pretty reactive. If the market is telling you something, that'll probably be number 2 for me, right? Be pretty reactive, right? Vision being proactive is great, but almost all your learnings are reactive. If you go to the market, if the market says something that is completely against what you think is true, listen to it, right? Like, because we all might have some visions of like what will always be true, but many are more often than not the market will tell you, right? So be a little, be a little reactive in terms of just understanding, and be very quick. So like my co-founder likes to call it shorter feedback loops, right? The goal of every company should be to see how quickly can their feedback loops shorten, right? So if you're trying to build something and for a year and trying to get a feedback loop, maybe the second time around I would probably build something for 2 months and get a feedback loop, and then kind of implement those changes, right? So that's been like a very, very large learning for me, right? And the third thing probably would be about just the way we hire people, right? Like your success of a company is almost entirely dependent on the team that works with you, right? Like, there's only so much that you as founders could do. So very obsessively focus on that, I guess. And in fact, this is actually a learning that's come from me in a certain way from a lot of mistakes we made also, right? Not just from, I don't think like we've been the best at it. We've tried to be pretty good, I would say decent, but there's a lot more we could do better that we're learning in the sense, right? So spend a lot of time in terms of how you hire and who you hire, and then trust them with responsibility, right? Like, so just give them a role and trust them with that instead of being there on top every single time, right? So yeah, these are some of the things I think like I've learned over the past few years of entrepreneurship that I've been a part of. Yeah.
How did you get your first customers?
Okay, so this time the first customer was completely outbound, right? In the sense, so again, a good learning for me between the first and the second company was the first company was pretty inside out, right? Like, so we had a view of what we wanted to build, and then we tried to sell it, and luckily we were able to get some customers who also scaled with us, and that's why we grew, right? The second time out, we actually started talking to customers a good year before we launched the product, right? So we launched it in April 2023, but we started talking to potential companies in April 2022, right? Of course, the first conversation would be more discovery, and we would just tell them that, hey, we're looking to learn and build and not trying to sell anything. Yes. But we'd start talking to them very early. So by the time you launch your product, right, we already raised the round and all of the stuff that we knew like the first set of customers that would potentially be kind of like our customers, right? We did not do design partners this time, right? So of course that's also a great way to start, like, but we wanted to kind of test out how much we can sell, right? Like actual customers and design partners sometimes like you're giving it for free, and some of the feedback kind of like becomes a little close loop, right? So we didn't want to do that, but we did kind of like work with companies. The first customers are predominantly outbound, that we were trying to kind of speak to a bunch of companies, try to understand categories that would that this product made sense for, or at least the best categories to land in. And that's kind of how the first in fact the first 3 to 4 customers were predominantly outbound customers, right? We speaking to different companies over a point of time and realizing this is a problem for them, right? But then we also parallelly started building an inbound engine, and now we've started getting like this month, probably I would say like 4th month into this thing is when after launch is when we've started getting a bunch of inbounds, and some inbound customers have signed up as well, right? Before that, it's predominantly all been founder-led sales or like a little bit of a hard push kind of sales initially. Yeah.
Understand. But you moved pretty quickly for April. Now it's July, so it's amazing.
Yeah, so the lucky part that we had was like, so we had a call to make, right? In the sense like if you're starting this company on day one, we wouldn't have had such a large team, right? So so the one thing was like, hey, because we're moving from company 1 to 2, do we kind of go back again to a very small team and kind of, and we're not very big fans of generally having very, very large teams, right? We want to kind of like see purpose and all of that, impact and all, right? But then what we also do, we had a pretty strong team and very engineering first team that we built with the first company. So we thought, okay, now that we have a slightly large team, how can we start using this better, right? So for example, a lot of the category creation or the branding work that we do, and not just for Togai around pricing, typically we wouldn't have done this so early. Let's say we'd have been like, hey, okay, this will probably be a month 10 or a year 2 kind of a problem, right? But this time, because we had the team, we were able to kind of say like, you know what, let's just start talking about it day 0 or even day minus 100, right? And so we were able to do that. We are doing it, right? Again, like all of these are like iterations, and we're nowhere close to being great at it, but the effort that goes into it has been for a while, right? So by the time this really becomes a factor, we have about 6 to 9 or 12 months of work that we've done. So we understand what works, what doesn't work, right? So that's something that's happened this time, yeah.
So you need a lot of patience to have a successful launch.
Yeah, absolutely, right. I mean, I in a sense that's true, right? But I haven't seen it as patience per se, right? Because the first when patience is when you're actually trying to build something and you're not even able to kind of like get anywhere, right? Like we had that when we started a company. This time it's more about just decision making over a different time scale, right? Like so now we know that we're building a 10-year company, right? So the plans that we make in the implementations are like, okay, let's plan for the year, right? Let's do this over a year. So we're not very impatient in terms of what happens in times of like within a week or 2 weeks, etc., right? But you also kind of need to be careful that this doesn't bring you into a lull, right? Okay, if just because you're building for 1 year, then you're like, okay, let's take it slow, right? So the momentum has to be pretty fast, but your decision making timelines or your learning timelines, it's okay if it's like you're building it over a larger time period, right? So it's this continuous thing that we keep trying out. Okay, we want to build something for a year, but we need to get feedback within 2 weeks, right? So that then we can iterate. So that's the challenge that you're trying to kind of like optimize for, right? You take the feedback in shorter loops, then slightly make changes around it, but don't lose track of the larger vision of what is it that you're building within that, right? So like a product versus a feature. If your product is going to solve for pricing, that's a long-term vision. Now what goes into it? Like, do you build A versus B first, or does A work or C work? Now those are things that you want to kind of like be changing pretty quickly. But the larger vision of the problem you're stating, that needs to be in this time. There's a much larger time scale to that, right? 1 year, 2 year, 5 year, right? So that way we're not pretty impatient, and we are comfortable with those timelines this time, right? I think that's also learning that by first company we built, we kind of learned, okay, slightly better. And also we have more resources this time, right?
Yes.
So we have the capital, we have the team. It kind of helps you just be a lot more planned around it, yeah.
That's very inspiring. Thank you. And now more on the personal side, I'd love to hear how you started your career.
Great. So I'm an engineer, right? I'm an engineer by education, right? And I actually started my career in data analytics. So after engineering, I was a mechanical engineer, and I kind of realized like I did not want to be a mechanical engineer while in college, right? So I was pretty clueless in terms of like what is it that I wanted to do. I always had that ambition to kind of like do business, as they call it in India, like the entrepreneur startup and all of this is a very relatively new term, right? In the olden age, you want to do business, like which means you just have your own boss, right? That's about it. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to kind of do that pretty early, but I didn't really know what or how. It was more of a very idea in the sky kind of thing. So after college, I just accidentally heard about these things called analytics. There were analytics companies that were coming up that was doing a lot of data stuff. I mean, I like math. I mean, I'm not the greatest at math. My co-founder is really good at it, but I like it. I like general quant and this thing, right? So it seemed interesting to me. So I ended up applying to a couple of companies and got in. And that's where I started my career. And it's a company called Latent View that recently went public in India, right? They're an analytics company. Worked with them for about 2 years. Then moved to this company called GE, right, which is the US Fortune 500 company, which again for the analytics team, right? So we were doing a lot of credit card analytics, risk analytics, and a lot of data models and stuff like that, right? I would say like I was decent at it, definitely not the best, like but above average at it, right? And then I did my B school, my MBA from Indian School of Business in India. And post B school I was very clear right now in the sense like after this I don't want to be working in a large company. I want to be working predominantly starting out my own company or at least going in the direction where I can do that soon enough, right? So post B school I actually ended up joining a very young startup again who had just kind of reached the seed round, was leading growth for them, was with them for about a year, felt that business kind of like the market conditions weren't really favorable for that growth. So then I moved to SaaS, right? And that was my first experience with SaaS, right? Which was a company which got acquired by Freshworks. And post acquisition by Freshworks, I kind of moved out. I didn't want to work with a larger company, so I moved out and started with Arvind, right? So it's been about a good 5 years plus now, and absolutely loving the journey, right? I mean, the only regret is that, like as always, like why couldn't I have started this earlier, right? So that's the, but otherwise that's been my career journey per se. Yeah.
So I guess one of your best piece of advice for a starting founder would be to start early. But apart from that, what would you advise him?
Right, yeah. So the one thing definitely is if it's something that you want to do, then yeah, starting earlier is always better because you are going to have a huge learning curve, and end of the day you also have like you have your personal things that like when your ability to take risks when you're younger is much higher, right? So if you're 23 or 24, you're sitting at a college dorm and building a company, and if you don't make any money for like 2 years, 3 years, nobody cares. You have multiple more chances to fail, right? As you kind of grow older, it's not impossible, right? I'm just saying general how humans work, right? You have family and stuff like that, then your ability to kind of like fail becomes more smaller, right? You need a lot more supportive systems. So absolutely, a lot of great founders start pretty late, but if you have the ability or if you think you want to start early, then do start early, right? That's number one, right? And advise founders for me is like, yeah, so for me the business comes first, right? Like both two things, right? Like me and Arvind, I actually, one of things that he likes to say a lot, and when we kind of had this conversation with each other saying like, hey, why do you want to start together? And this is, we were friends for 20 years before that, right? But the core points, the reasons why we started, right? Maybe those I could just share, right? I don't know if it's advice, but if people resonate, that's great, right? So for Arvind, it was always about, the value per hour, right? So he keeps saying that, hey, just be very clear of what is the value per hour that you make, right? At a big company, you might be getting a great salary and all of that, right? But how much impact and value you're creating per hour, for example, right? And if you can create or do something that essentially gives you the ability to do that much higher than your ability to do things over your lifetime, right? Let's say over 20, 30 years, you get to do a lot more things, right? Like, so that's probably a great reason why you should kind of like start, right? And also for me, the second thing is about what do you like to do, right? So it is entrepreneurship. I mean, I don't think there's a lot of ego around entrepreneurship, but it's not about building something on your own. It's about actually finding a problem that you can spend 10 years of your life on, right? Like my biggest belief is that in the sense like, it takes a really long time to build something of value, right? Like it's something that's true, and you have to kind of enjoy a journey, and you can't be optimizing for 6 months, 12 months. It takes 10 years, it takes 15 years to build something of value, right? Everything compounds, right? Just like money, right? So if you want to kind of like take that amount of time, the core thing for you to do is find a problem that you resonate with. Now, if some other company is solving for the problem, you want to be a part of it, great. But if you're not able to find that, then you go, and that is your entrepreneurship problem, right? Find the problem and then spend 10 years of your life solving for that, right? And we're all capitalistic here, any startup, like, so we want to kind of like create a lot of monetary value as well, but that almost always becomes a side effect, right? Like, since if you're building a great company and listening to the market, you're solving for a great problem and listening to the market, you will most certainly make money in the medium to long run, right? So yeah, those would probably be two things that I would say if somebody wants to start out here.
Thank you so much. You did fantastic. I have one last question for you.
Sure.
What's your favorite SaaS product apart from Togai?
So, I mean, just like I would actually go, my all-time favorite would be Excel, right? Like, so, like I, in the sense like it's in my it's like a running thing that my friends keep tripping on me about, right? So I'm the guy who kind of like puts everything on Excel. So if you go on a trip, or if you go on like just some random stat or something, everything is an Excel sheet for, right? For something that's really ridiculous that I feel embarrassed to even share about, I have an Excel sheet for, right? So I've been like the most the OG tool when it comes to SaaS products for me would be Excel, right? But Slack, one other company that I really admire would be another product. Yeah.
Is there anything else that you want to mention on today's podcast?
No, I had great fun. Yeah. Like I think it was very conversational, and thanks for making me feel very comfortable. I think this is probably just the first few of the podcasts I've done. So thank you for this. This was lovely, and I hope to do a lot more of these. Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining. You did fantastic, and thank you for the value that you provided. I'm super grateful.
Thanks, Christian. Take care. Have a good one.